I want to bring in MSNBC political analyst Tim Miller, who's worked on Jeb Bush's 2016 campaign and hosts the Bulwark podcast, and Robbie Mook, Hillary Clinton's former campaign manager and currently president of the House Majority PAC. Robbie, how tricky will it be for Vice President Harris to remain part of this administration and appear with the president and then try to split with him and his policies literally the next day?
Well, I don't think it's quite as black and white as that. I mean, she is her own person. She worked with the president, but she has her own plan for the future. And I think at the end of the day, the contest in this race is about which candidate has a plan for the future, which candidate do voters feel can bring us into a better future. And the problem that Donald Trump has had all along is he has a pretty icky past. His time in the White House was full of instability, recklessness. We all remember him talking about drinking bleach to cure COVID. And so Harris has this incredible opportunity to have all the advantages of incumbency, right? She walked into a campaign with a big bank account, staff, people out in states, all the things ready to go. But I think the voters are willing to hear her out and let her chart her own course. And that's both an opportunity, but it's also a challenge. She's got to go get that done. I think the time to do that is running out, but this is the perfect time to unveil those policies as she goes into the convention.
Tim, I want to read for you part of what the New York Times said today about Vice President Harris's plan going forward. The Times reports she will lay out an approach relatively light on details. It will shift emphasis from Mr. Biden's focus on job creation and made in America manufacturing and toward efforts to rein in the cost of living. But it will rarely break from Mr. Biden on substance. That strategy reflects the advice economic aides have given Ms. Harris to be clear and bold in talking about the economy, but not overly specific. Tim, what do you make of that strategy? And is this the kind of plan you think she can ride for another 12 weeks?
It's only 12 weeks, right? And so I do think that's an opportunity for her in addition to being a challenge, right? There's fewer time for, having to deal with having different challenges. Had she gone through a primary, other Democratic challengers trying to poke holes in plans, et cetera. I think a lot of times Democrats traditionally have gotten a little too bogged down in plans and white papers, and Republican campaigns have been a little bit better about being breezier on details and focusing on thematics. Whether that's right or wrong, it is something that tends to help in a campaign setting. And so I think that she can. I think that the challenge, just listen to Robbie talk, is she's got to talk about the future. There has to be enough meat on the bones for what is the plan for the future? How are we going to reduce costs, either at the grocery store, in housing? I noticed in her first ad, she mentioned reducing housing costs, which I think is really smart. That's an issue that a lot of people are dealing with right now. And then Donald Trump on the other side, he's going to wants her to carry all the baggage that was keeping Biden's numbers down on this. And so I think that will be the push and pull between the campaigns, with her talking about how she's not going back and Trump doing his best in between his weird tangents to try to, make her carry the Biden baggage on economic issues, particularly inflation.
Guys, stay with me. NBC's Dasha Burns is joining us in Asheville, North Carolina, the site of Trump's afternoon rally. And so, Dasha, what's Trump going to say today? What's his economic message to the country?
Well, look, Anna, you could see his visit to a state like North Carolina as playing a bit of defense, given this has been a Republican stronghold for the last few elections. He won here in both 2016 and in 2020. But as Harris is trying to open the aperture, widen the map for Democrats in states like North Carolina, in states like Georgia, that were seen as kind of out of play for Democrats when President Biden was at the top of the ticket, the Trump campaign will say they're not taking any states, any votes for granted, and he's here to deliver a message on the economy. This is a state that has had a Republican legislature as well, mostly Republican-held positions across the state, with the exception of Governor Roy Cooper, who is a Democrat. But the Trump campaign will say, look, a lot of businesses in North Carolina are booming in places like Raleigh and places like Charlotte, and he will say that that is a result of Republican policies. He knows that right now, for now, he's still polling better than Democrats, than Harris, than certainly better than Biden on the economy. Harris trying to chip away at that, but he's going to try to deliver that message and contrast what he could do on the economy versus his opponent. The question is, this is what the campaign wants him to do, what he theoretically wants to do, but what the plan is for the message today and what the actual execution looks like with former President Trump, you never know how aligned those will be. Just this morning, he was asked about some of the talking points lately that his campaign is not so thrilled about, him questioning the size of Kamala Harris's crowds, for example, other conspiracies around a coup of President Biden. Take a listen to what he said as he was voting early in West Palm Beach this morning.
We have the biggest crowds ever in the history of politics. We have crowds that nobody's ever seen before, and we continue to have that. We have a level of enthusiasm that nobody's seen before. They want to make America great again. That's what's happening. We're going to make it great again. Right now, we have a failing nation. We're in a failing nation and become in many ways a third world nation, and we're not going to let that happen.
And Anna, you've heard his allies, people like Kellyanne Conway, like Vivek Ramaswamy, like Nikki Haley, who, of course, was an opponent but now has endorsed him, go on television in the last few days and say you are not going to win if you're talking about crowd sizes, if you're talking about race, if you're launching these personal attacks on Harris. Talk about her record, tie her to President Biden. That is the more successful path forward. The question is, how much will that message resonate with the guy that is control of the message, is in control of the message, former President Trump, on it.
Dasha Burns reporting for us. Thank you. So President Biden made some news just a few minutes ago when he dropped by the White House Creator Economy Conference and was asked about inflation. Here's what he said.
Has the U.S. beat inflation, Mr. President?
Yes. I told you we're going to have a soft landing. We're going to have a soft landing. My policies are working. Start writing that way, okay?
And Mr. President,
anyway, thank you
so
much.
Thank you so much. We got to move this way, Gabe. Mr. President, did you know your son reached out to you?
Robbie, what do you make of the president essentially declaring victory here?
Well, the number, I'm not an economist, obviously. The numbers speak for themselves, and they are good. But I think the election is going to be very divorced from economic figures. Obviously, the stock market doesn't represent the economy. And although inflation is coming down, the pain of inflation is still going to be very present in people's lives. You know, when I'm out talking to people, or you can look at it in a focus group, people talk about how things are just a lot more expensive than they used to be 5 years ago. And what's really encouraging to me is to see that Harris is actively going to take that on. It's hard for a president to go out and immediately lower prices. That's not how our country works. That's not how our economy works. But I do believe both candidates need to present a credible plan for a way that they could try to get prices lower. And I think this is actually, I totally agree with Tim's point that I think Democrats tend to get in the weeds and want to do our fancy white papers. But I think this is actually a place where Trump's flippant attitude and his lack of detail is probably to his detriment, because when he says, you know, by tomorrow I'll make everything, 10% cheaper, it's just not credible. And so I'm interested to see what he says today and, see how these dueling plans match up.
And again, the numbers just this morning, 2.9% inflation, the lowest we've seen in the last 3 years, 3.6% wage growth. So people are earning more than they're having to pay for some of these items. Tim, is it enough for Trump to just channel Ronald Reagan and ask voters if they're better off than they were 4 years ago?
Not really, because we were all locked in our rooms 4 years ago. So, are you better off than you were 5 years ago? Doesn't have quite the same ring to it. So I don't think so. He has offered some specificity on his plan, and that is a hugely inflationary tariff on everything. So, and that's what I'm going to be looking at today. Is he going to continue with his protectionist tariff policy? And I think that would give an opportunity to the Harris campaign on Friday to talk about how he actually would increase prices with his plans, and potentially have an olive branch out to my people, kind of the free market Republicans who don't like former Republicans who don't like Donald Trump, who are going to be key swing voters in North Carolina and in Georgia. So I think that's something to watch for on the economic side as well.
Tim Miller and Robbie Mook, please stay with us.